Welcome to One Version of the Truth. This is a show about how leaders make decisions in complex environments where incentives are messy, priorities compete, and there's rarely a single objective answer. In each episode, I sit down with operators, executives, and industry leaders to unpack how value is actually created and how data and AI can help distort or get misunderstood along the way. I'm your host, Taylor Culver. I work with senior leaders to connect data to real business outcomes. I started this podcast to move beyond theory and frameworks and get the judgment calls that actually move organizations forward. Today, I'm joined by Matt Wicks, co-CEO of the Virtual Forge, a global technology consultancy helping organizations navigate data, AI, software engineering, and digital transformation. Matt has spent decades building products, leading teams, and helping organizations solve complex business problems. He's worked through multiple technology waves from the early days of web applications and cloud computing to today's AI revolution. In this conversation, we explore a reality many technologies leaders eventually discover. Most transformation initiatives don't fail because the technology is wrong. They fail because trust breaks down. We talk about why great products start with story, why simplicity often beats sophistication, how organizational politics shape technology outcomes, and what happens when executive sponsors lose confidence in a project. We also discuss the promises and limitations of AI, what business leaders misunderstand about the technology, and why managing expectations may be more important than managing systems. And maybe most importantly, why successful transformation is ultimately a people problem, not a technology problem. This is Season 1, Episode 7, Matt Wicks. Today we're here with Matt Wicks, co-CEO of the Virtual Forge, a global consulting organization that spans multiple countries and continents, employs hundreds of people, and solves some of the most complex data and AI challenges that you see around large enterprises today. Matt, pleasure to
Great
have you here.
Yeah, it's fantastic to be here, Taylor. Thank you.
Yeah.
Looking
Before
forward
we
to it.
get started, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got to where you are?
Yeah, sure. So I've kind of gone through a slightly unconventional path, if there is such a thing as a conventional path. I actually studied theatre originally, and when I realized that I was not going to be able to make any money out of that, I kind of diversified, and I spent quite a lot of time living in Portugal. And then at that point, I started working as a technical evangelist for Adobe for a while, and then I met my current business partner, Garrett Doyle, who's the other CEO who handles the commercial arm of the business, and together we've run the Virtual Forge for 17 years now. We're based in the UK. We have development offices in Portugal, and we have a data arm in the US as well, doing lots of interesting things. And over time, we've incubated various other companies. So kind of quite a broad spread of small, medium, large customers as well. But it's been a strange journey for sure.
Well, tell me this. You've been in the business for almost 2 decades. This business changes a lot fast, and a lot can happen in 10 years. In the past 10 years, the changes have been radical, to say the least. But what do you think we're going to be laughing about in 10 years that seems very important today?
So I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I think you're right in terms of the changes. The changes are massive, and I kind of, I can remember getting my very first computer and all of that sort of slightly cliched stuff. And I think if you try to look forward and project, it's really harder now than it's ever been before, because the pace of change is so extraordinary. But I think apart from kind of fashion and things like that, which of course we'll laugh about, I think some of the assumptions that we're making about how our systems work. So, we for a long time, we've kind of made the assumption that everything has to be an app or everything has to be a web page or something like that. And already you start to see that kind of fading away now into things like Claude Code or various other tools where you're now moving to an interface where you're just talking to things, or everything is all done through one interface. So I think we'll be laughing about how quaint all of those apps were and how quaint all of those websites were, and how I suspect we'll be looking at it going, wow, imagine 5 years ago or 10 years ago, if we thought this was possible, just like we do now, if we think back to what we thought 10 years ago and so on as well.
We'll be looking at the modern SaaS applications today, no different than we probably look at Napster or Netscape, which were transformative at the time.
Exactly. You look at it and you think, those are, and I don't think it's just about SaaS is hugely crowded kind of environment, but I think it's about the way in which we think about things and we work with things. It's kind of like the same as as when Steve Jobs brought out the iPhone, and suddenly everybody, their conception of what a phone was changed. I think our conception of what software is changing as well in that way, for sure.
The user experience is
Yeah.
radically different. You know what's interesting is when we first met, we were talking about AI. Before the AI was really AI, what's different about data and AI in 2026 than 2016?
So I think a lot of the pinnings are the same, but I think the fact that it's so accessible to so many people, and I think, I can remember 12 years ago doing events where I'd stand up and I'd kind of show doing some using machine learning to do some predictive text and say, it's amazing using this. You can actually get, if you run it for 54 hours, you can get a prediction of what the football result is going to be or something like that. And now it's still the same thing, but it's, 54 seconds or less than that to be able to get to those same things. So I think there's that. The barrier to entry is way, way, way lower than it was then as well. Obviously, the hardware is so much more capable of being able to deliver results. But I think also as business people, our kind of understanding of what's possible, even though it's all hyped up and everything, our understanding of what's possible is so much greater. And that's driving a lot of those things. Whereas previously, 12, 14 years ago, it tended to be technologists who were saying, hey, this is great. If you give me £100,000 budget, I can predict something. Whereas now it's actually driven by the business a lot of the time, which is great, I think.
Yeah, it's the foundational transformation, which I think is so cool, is that putting technology in the hands of the business is really what drives innovation. And I think AI moves that so much further down the path. Well, tell me this. So a lot of people are new to AI because of that, because in the past it was like, oh, it's a data scientist
Yeah.
who creates some algorithm that predicts the future. It probably seems more of a black box. What kind of learnings have business people missed out on the past 15 years when it comes to AI that they may have like skipped steps without even realizing it?
Sure.
What are they missing out on? What are perspectives that they could benefit as they kind of put their toe in the water?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I think is, and this astonishes me to be perfectly honest nowadays, is the speed at which things are being built and deployed. In some cases, you see things going into large enterprises, even as well as SMEs and so on, that kind of haven't gone through the processes that you would have had for previous things. So, I mean, and I don't just mean technical process and security governance and all of that. Also mean just business processes, actually understanding what's the return you're going to get on it. What are the realistic expectations of what you can do with it? How can you build something that is capable of changing quickly? Because whatever decisions you're making today, you've kind of almost got to build change into those decisions in a way that you didn't have to make previously. So I think, not understanding where it all came from means that people are making sometimes quite blind assumptions about how tools are working, what kind of how rigorous the analysis of those tools has been when they get put into places and so on. So I think that's different. I think also there is a little bit of, and I don't know if this is just me being an old whatever, but I think there is a little bit of, oh, wow, it's magic. It does all of this stuff. And that blinds you sometimes to the fact that it isn't magic, that there is a process and there's crunching of numbers and stuff that happens under the hood. So when there are problems, when there's hallucinations or it misses out information or it makes an assumption that you think is wrong, it's not because, somebody's it's gone off the rails or gone mad or something. There's a technical reason why that's happened. And I think if you don't have the grounding in that, sometimes you can just end up misunderstanding how AI works as well.
I hear that all the time, which is AI is not magic; it's
Yeah.
math.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and for a lot of people, it's like, well, I put in this and I get that. Wow, like it and I mean, it's a reflection of the value for sure. But at the end of the day, it's bits and
Yeah.
bytes, right?
It's
It's
it's exactly that. Yeah. And it is wow. I mean, I still kind of go, oh my God, you know, but at the same time, it is essentially kind of predicting based on human knowledge. Effectively, and I think that in itself, as we all know, as well as obviously as well, if you're involved in looking at the data that makes up human knowledge in a lot of places, it's has some challenges in terms of being able to generate the correct response as well in those
Yeah,
circumstances.
well, the problems with AI are the problems with data,
Yeah.
and a lot of data executives would say, Yes, thank you." And it's nice to hear a CEO say that, because a lot of times when people say, "Oh, the AI doesn't work because of the data," you get eye rolls, and it's like, you got to understand that it's only as good as what's going into it in a lot of ways, and now it can extract context much easier. You don't need to model the data probably as richly, and it can work with unstructured data in ways that have been unforeseen, right? Imagine what it's done to search alone, right? And
And I think also, again, like, that's an evolving point. You know, the AI models have a context window, which is the amount of information you give to them to explain a problem, and that's expanded massively in the last 18 months, from sort of
yeah, formats.
400 words to 3
Yeah,
million words. You know, is 3 million words enough, or is it too much? And suddenly, if you're giving it all of this context, it's like if somebody sits down and feeds you a meeting for 24 hours and then
yeah.
says, "What's the answer to this question?" You're kind of going, you know, maybe it could be this, or maybe, and sometimes you get those really verbose answers from the AI, and it's because it's kind of, it's working like the human brain in that way, I think.
You were just describing a meeting you had the other day, and it kind of reminds me of that. Is all this information? It's like, so what's the answer? And it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
good question.
I can't remember. What was your name?
Yeah, exactly. Well, tell me this, is that, and this is kind of two questions, is where do you think AI isn't very good despite all the hype? And where do you think it's not getting the attention it deserves?
So, to take the second one first, I think so. You know, working technology company, there's loads and loads of examples of us using it for building software and things like that. And I think that's where it is brilliant. It does a really good job, and it does almost live up to the hype. But if you then take that to I saw a really, really interesting article about medical triage being used in Africa recently. And so people are actually able to go out in the field where there are, you know, there's no doctors or nurses around for you know, a massive area, or they're covering a massive area, and they're able to do kind of first line medical triage using AI in a way that, or the local people are able to do first line medical triage in a way that they would never have been able to before. And then it's connected to all of the databases that give you information about, you know, symptoms and causes and actions and priorities. So they're able then to decide, okay, you know, this person who doesn't look so ill actually is a priority, and so on. Obviously, there's a massive area just in terms of deployment for that to cover, but the power that it has to revolutionize lives in those sorts of environments, you know, is astonishing, and is really, really powerful. And I don't think that gets anything like enough bandwidth and time as other things. Where it's overrated, so I think sometimes some of the reasoning claims are slightly overrated, because at the moment anyway, and obviously with Fable 5 and so on, that was kind of going up another level, although not right now.
Once not
Yes.
illegal.
Let's not talk about that one. But you know, essentially, it can appear to do really good reasoning, or they can appear to do really good reasoning, but they are still doing it based upon pattern matching and so on of previous pieces of information. So I think sometimes you do get, and we've all done it. I've definitely done it. I've kind of put something in and go, wow, that's amazing, and then you kind of going back through it with a client or a colleague, and you're going, yeah, actually, it's not really reasoning stuff out. It hasn't really got that depth that I would have thought of for edge cases, for example, or for nuance sometimes. And I think also it's a bit like, I always kind of think about it. We used to have somebody who worked for, I won't name it, somebody who worked for us, who would always say, yes, but it should be this way, it should be this way, it should be this way. And it doesn't necessarily always understand the various nuances that are pressured. So it reminds me a little bit like that. So I think, you know, it's still absolutely incredible, but I don't think it's quite as good as you believe when you first see a reasoned argument or something coming out.
Well, and I think you point on something particularly interesting, is it should be, it should be, it should be, when there are truths that aren't rational in today's world,
True.
right?
That's very
And
interesting.
and you'll be in an organization where an organization should have great data quality, but the truth is the cost of having great data quality probably exceeds the benefit once you get into the brass tacks of how that works. And it's interesting how AI kind of mirrors that, which is based on the context. It should be this. However, sometimes people just don't get along,
Yeah.
and politics shape organizations more than strategy.
Yeah.
And I'm curious in your own experience, because you've worked on the customer side and you run a company and it's a global company. So people are different. and can be different. How much does politics shape outcomes versus solutions?
That's a really, really interesting question. I mean, and I don't think it's even just different countries. I think, in the same office,
Yeah.
it's the same thing. Everybody has different things that drive them. Everybody has different agendas. I think also when you're part of any organization for a long time, you begin to build up views of yourself and that organization. And, those might be good views or they might be bad views, or they might be views of like, oh, well, we're never going to do this, or they might, all of those things happen. And I think we see that in all organizations that we work with. And it doesn't necessarily mean that people are competing with each other, although sometimes they are. But essentially, it means that their primary goal is very often not to deliver whatever it is you're trying to deliver. They have whatever else is going on in the mix as well. And I think that's very difficult for AI to understand, or it's very difficult for people to understand, because, we all have a certain level of empathy, but there are people who we all find it really difficult to be empathic with. And I think that in itself is almost impossible in this current state to transfer to AI. So, it is very much like having that person in the room who is kind of completely emotionally separated from everything else that's happening and doesn't have that. And they're just like, exactly as you say, and I think politics does drive a lot of decision making. And I think that's impossible. When I started out, I used to kind of think, oh, yeah, if we could just find the client or just have the piece of work where we could just get on with the work and be done. But I just think that's impossible. I don't think human nature, and myself included, it's not like I'm suddenly, you know, but I think that's quite interesting, where AI is like you say, AI is almost this window on, well, if you didn't have all this stuff, you could do this, but it's just not the reality on the ground.
It's interesting in the software language. There's a word I like called truthy, it's interesting how we pursue truthiness in organizations to drive value and impact change. Tell me this, and something I've always enjoyed about working with you is that you believe that every product starts with a great story, and you're a phenomenal storyteller. Why do you lead with that principle?
Thank you. Um, because ultimately, whether you're looking at metrics or whether you're looking at raw data or whether you're looking at a product, the fundamental thing is it's all about communication and how you communicate something. I mean, that's why Apple has been so successful, because what they do and what their tools do communicates really easily. Google, like, what does that search box do? You don't need to understand all of the stuff behind it there. And so I think when you're developing a product, you need to make sure, first of all, that you understand the story behind what people want to do, but also to make sure that you can kind of take people on that journey with you. It's like, if you are this person in this scenario, what is it that you're gonna get from it? What is the experience going to be like that you have when this product arrives, and how could we make that experience better for you? And that doesn't just mean the user experience, although that's a really important part of it, but it's part of um, the whole journey that people go on, and telling them that story at the beginning is part of getting their buy-in to it, but it's also part of making sure that you're setting out on the journey with them in the same boat, if you like, down the river. And, everybody knows that we've all got to pull a sail up together to make it work. And the destination is this little island over here, and we're just all going the right way. And I think sometimes that just helps frame things as well in that way.
I love it. You know, I think something that's funny is I think the human brain is attracted to complexity, and we avoid simplicity because oftentimes simplicity is very, very hard. Why do some great products that are so simple in nature succeed while some of the most sophisticated technologies fail within organizations?
Because of exactly that. Because I think so. So we have a product that we've developed called My Content Scout, which is an AI search tool. And I was very determined from the beginning of that it would be really, really simple to use and really, really simple. I swear to God, the first like 40 meetings we had with various people, I was saying, no, take it out, no, take it out, no, take it out. It's got to be, and then I found myself about 6 months ago sitting in a meeting and kind of looking at the features for that particular sprint. And I was like, I've just fallen into the trap of adding in complexity and building in additional bloat into it. And I think the reason why that happened a little bit was because obviously taking a product to market, you're keen to get people purchasing it. And often you come up against that thing of like, this is fantastic, we love it. If it just did this, we'd definitely go for it. So you kind of build in that little bit of extra. And then somebody in the team, and building a product with a team is important that they all have a voice and that you listen to their ideas. Somebody will come up and they say, yeah, we could do this. And other people in the team will say, yeah, this would be good. This would be good. And gradually kind of features get added by the way. And that doesn't mean they're bad features, but it does mean that you're constantly adding things on. And I think in organizations, it's the same thing. In big organizations, especially, you have something that starts out for one purpose. Somebody comes along and says, actually, you know what, we could use this for this other purpose if we just added this extra bit onto it. Or you have another situation, which happens a lot in larger organizations, that people move around quite a lot. So you have, somebody is a stakeholder for 2 years, they'll deliver their project, they'll move on to the next thing. Somebody else will come in, they have to make their mark in the 2 years, and this will be left to kind of go fallow. And then there'll be cost cutting. So somebody comes in and says, okay, well, we've got this, let's use this. This is good enough, but we can put this on the top of it. And those just naturally kind of grow organically. And I think the reason why simplicity, going back to your question, the reason why simplicity works is, people essentially, unless you're a technologist, you probably don't love the system or love the data or love the process of building it. What you probably love is being able to get the answer quickly so you can get to your next promotion or get home or whatever. And that's it. And anything that delivers that. And that's why I think AI has been really successful. It's partly because it is magic, but it's also partly because you don't need to know anything to use it. You just speak to it or type and it's there.
It can turn a amateur into an expert very quickly,
For
and
good or
I
ill.
which is for better or worse. But the problem, it's like, sure, it can redline a complicated government contract and give you a rebuttal. Now sit in the room with a lawyer and try to have a meaningful conversation with them. So it's why people give vibe coders so much trouble. It's like, sure, you can get something built on your computer, but you have a to-do app with 500 tables in a database and probably 90% more code than you need. By the way, good luck deploying it to the cloud. you know, and
Yeah.
and I think it's one of the challenges is it raises people's beyond their level of competency to incredibly complex skills that take decades to learn. It's like now you're a security expert, but like until you've been through 4 breaches, you don't know what it's like to be an expert. The apprenticeship without the experience is
Yeah,
going to be interesting.
that's really interesting. And I think that goes back to what I said at the beginning, where I look around and I see people doing these things, in enterprises, they're letting people go loose to build all these things. And, what they're building is amazing. But at the same time, if somebody had come in a few years ago and said, our intern's just gonna do a security audit of all of our reports, don't worry about it, they'll just build it would never have happened. So it is quite interesting.
So tell me this is you have a unique perspective because you're on the leadership side with clients and you're on the leadership side with your own organization. How do you run data and technology initiatives internally versus externally with your customer? Do you have the same standards, or do you find that large organizations demand different solutions than smaller organizations? But where does your philosophy differ between those two types of work?
So I think everybody starts a project, I think internally or externally, large or small. I think everybody starts a project with the aim of getting whatever the data is or whatever the metrics are they want to have reported on. They want them to be accurate. They want them to be timely. They want them to be comprehensive, and et cetera, secure, all of those things. And I think that's the same. And I think the truth that is the same across the board is there are compromises that are made. And if we're doing something internal, we've just been rebuilding all of our internal sales pipeline reporting. And, the compromise we always have to make in those processes is, we obviously take the client work first and we do that first. So something gets pushed back, or we have a free resource here who will then slot in, and somebody else who has done it previously will be on a paid work. So I think there are compromises there. In larger organizations, the compromise is usually one of cost. Sometimes it's one of accessibility. We're working with a huge organization at the moment, and our stakeholder wants access to all of this data. They're happy to pay for it, but unfortunately, they can't have access because of internal processes and policies and so on. So I think somewhere, and then gradually the scope gets whittled down and so on. I think trying to stay true to what is the thing that they are trying to produce at the end, whether that's a report or whether it's an interactive AI bot querying the data or whether it's just a presentation or a video about the kind of status, whatever that end product is, I think you have to be willing and capable, which are two different things, of understanding where the compromises are that you can make in that journey. But does every single data point have to be absolutely clean and perfect? Is that really what's going to drive it? Do you have to understand the tolerances in there? Do you want to make sure that you have proper stewardship over the data? Do you want to make sure that you're delivering it in a absolutely nanosecond up to date, or are you willing to trade one for the other? What about resiliency, et cetera? What about auditability and all of those things as well? And I think, wherever the project is, it's always got to be focused. It's like the story thing. It's like you're taking people to this journey, whether you go down the rapids or whether you go down the like little side canal or whether you stop overnight and camp, all of those things are part of the journey in there as well. And we all know that the nirvana is, timely, secure, up to date, perfect, no data quality issues. But the reality on all of those, I think, is the reality.
So tell me this. You have a unique leadership situation in your organization, which I see more and more, which is co-CEOs, where you lead the delivery and technology side, and your partner Garrett, he runs the commercial side.
Yes.
What's interesting about that is in your engagements, he may end up working with the customer and you may be working with the user. Oftentimes, they're both leaders within the company, and you end up in between the executive sponsor and the champion for the initiative.
Yeah.
What happens when they get disconnected? How do you close that gap? And even if both parties are right, sometimes you end up in, like I was saying earlier, a truthy situation. How do
Yeah.
you navigate that divide?
Yeah, it's really tricky, and it depends on each different client as well. I mean, I think the way that we've divided our company, we both understand our roles and where those kind of lines are really well. And I think my case is always championing the user and the product that's being built as essentially. But at the same time, I also have and have evolved over time a much closer kind of commercial awareness of the consequences of things and the political awareness of keeping the customer happy as well. And I think, I certainly couldn't and wouldn't want to manage both sides of that equation. And I think I'd speak fairly for Garrett, so he wouldn't want to manage both sides of those equations either. So I think it's really good that we have the ability to have those two different sides to us. We're very different people, and I think that also helps as well. But I think above and beyond anything else, in both cases, it is all about taking all the stakeholders along with you on the journey, and just kind of making sure at the beginning everyone knows where they're going, everyone understands and aligns on what are the expectations of each other party, even if they're internal to an organization. Because one of the things that we have, I think, is a great advantage. There are pros and cons of doing things internally in an organization, but bringing in external specialists into an organization gives them the ability to kind of be the neutral arbiter. And some of the history that sometimes is there in the middle gets lost because you have these neutral arbiters in there as well. And also having somebody who is on the customer side, somebody who is on the user side, gets a sense of balance, and nobody feels like they're underrepresented or unrepresented.
But the politics are inevitable, right? And
Yeah.
and I think there's a fantasy amongst executives that it's like, oh, if I go to the consulting route, that goes away. And it's like, no, you're held hostage to it. And in addition to that, you often become the collateral in the political exchange, and it impacts a lot more. So it can at times be quite worse in a lot of ways. So something that I kind of wrestle with, and it's hard for me personally, is I see a lot of customers struggle because I'm privy to their growth journey, and growth is great until you have to grow, and because it's quite painful and no one
Yeah.
does it in stride.
Yeah.
So how do you help your customers navigate those challenges without setting them up for political ramifications and losing their sponsors?
So that's a really interesting question. So I think because we've been through our own growth process as well, we've kind of walked the walk a little bit, which I think helps. But also because we've been doing it so long, we've kind of seen lots and lots of different circumstances as well. I think, I don't know that we truly help people avoid political ramifications. I think the best that we can say we do is we deliver the product, whatever that is that they want to, And we try in the process to make sure that they understand why we're doing the things we do and what the consequences of each choice that they're making is in there. Because, growing an organization of any size, like once you go beyond 2, 3, 4 people, suddenly going up to 20 and then going up to 60, each time you do that, essentially what you're making is a bunch of choices about the consequences of your actions. I'm going to employ 20 people. Suddenly I'm responsible for all of those people, and each one of those people is not going to get on with each other. So therefore, you suddenly have to have kind of management in order to organize that. And then suddenly the systems that you built in place, which worked fine for 5 of you, is suddenly not good for 20, not good for 60. And then you've got to have a project that manages to move all of that stuff across. And then suddenly you've got to have you're dealing with bigger situations. You've got to have more governance over it because people might want to track. You could become certified. There's a whole bunch of things that happen sequentially as part of that. And some of those are purely systemic and some of those are purely process, but a lot of them are just interpersonal. And a lot of them are just about listening to people and making sure you've got the right people in the right positions. And that also goes for working with clients. Like, I can have, and I have, lots and lots of really talented people who work for me, but there are some people I cannot put into particular clients just because personality types would not work. And you have to be able to make those judgments as well. And likewise, if you're kind of working with a client to set up success, you've got to be at least a little bit aware of the emotions in the room and how things will work to stop a project versus the actual technical delivery part of it as well, I think.
And I think that's why it requires really, really high EQ
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to lead data and AI initiatives.
Yeah, that's
Weird
true.
as that sounds.
Yeah, yeah,
And
it's true.
and it's why I kind of started this podcast is because I think that there's ample material out there on how to do governance, how to do
Yeah,
architecture. And I think there are ample technology solutions out there that are wonderful and great. But traction is lost when the internal champion loses trust.
yeah.
And I'm curious, what does that usually look like? And what are the symptoms within an organization that the data leader or whoever's sponsoring the technology change is losing trust with their executive sponsor?
I think it depends on the executive sponsor. Like sometimes I think it can be as simple as the executive sponsor just not turning up to the meetings and kind of silently voting with their feet effectively. I think it can also be, you detect the change in the tone of voice in the room when people are talking to them. I think often at the beginning of a project when a data leader is in a good place, they're given a lot freer remit. If things start to go wrong, decisions start to be questioned the whole time. And we've been in situations where we've been asked to effectively validate things that the data leader has been saying in the room. And that's a sure sign that things are going and a very uncomfortable sure sign that things are going
Yeah,
wrong
that's
as
tough.
well. But I do think the way in which different and some organizations just handle it really publicly, and some organizations you kind of find that it just gets swept under the carpet and the project gets either stopped or delayed, or if somebody new is brought on the project just to keep an eye on it or something like that. And I think that then becomes difficult because you have disenfranchised people, you have people who are trying to kind of move forward and so on. And ultimately, the one thing nobody's focused on is actually solving the data problem that you're trying to solve at that point.
And this is normal. Like this is normal in organizations large and small.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
You're on your heels, you're on the defense. Have you seen any tactics in your experience when to overcome some of these challenges? Or when these red flags start appearing, is the leader just doomed?
I think it's very difficult to roll it back, if I'm honest. Um, you know, think I think the reasons for that happening are usually visible long before that happening. And I think, if there is a tactic, the tactic is helping them be transparent with what's happening on the project, making sure that at the beginning they're not setting up unreasonable expectations. Because I would say 85% of the reasons I've seen that is because things have been overpromised or what they're trying to achieve has been not properly scoped at the beginning or misunderstood. So therefore, and they might get lucky and it might, but and I think one of the things that we always pride ourselves on really trying to do is to make sure that whatever we're proposing is something that's achievable and manageable, even if it's not the gold standard of what they ultimately want. I think you have to try and help them see that this is not achievable within their budget or their organization and so on. I think once it's gone beyond that and people, and maybe you've called out a few times, listen, this is a problem, this is a problem. And if they sweep that under the carpet and don't highlight that or don't take steps to remedy it, I think it's really difficult to get back from that stage because, yeah.
I think those are two clear pearls of wisdom, which is managing expectations before you even get started. And then two, bringing transparency to the operating model to deliver that value. Because if that's not there, you lose people on the journey. And I think that's a huge area of improvement for people. And I see this often very similarly. Tell me this, you started in theater and kind of reading between the lines, maybe you earlier in your career were very principled on right and wrong as it comes to technology. How has your leadership style changed over the years as technology has changed and as you've gotten towards the truthiness of how people work versus the constraints of system thinking?
So it's interesting because I think there are two sides to leadership. And I think there's the publicly facing leadership, which is the co-CEO of a company going into the clients, very visibly there. And I don't think my style has changed on that piece. The kind of, internally, I think one of the things that I've always believed very strongly is that you need to make sure that you have very solid successors in place in order to facilitate the actual work happening, but also to eventually kind of take over from you and that. And I think while I've always believed that, it's probably taken 10 years to get those people in the right places with the right skills, with the right confidence levels to be able to really take that. So, I can focus on being the client facing piece and not have to worry too much about the internal processes of the company. And I think too often leaders either are nervous about having solid people behind them or leave it too late or don't give enough time for that process to happen, because it's not just a question of finding the right people. It's also a question of making sure you are aligned in mindset as well. And I guess if there's one change in my day-to-day stuff, it's more about letting them do more of it and me kind of just kind of be a bit lazier. Because I think the truth is, you're not helping yourself if you do everything, and you're not actually helping the client if you do everything. You're not also helping the company if you do everything. So having those people who can take the weight of stuff, I think is really, really important. But it
Yeah,
takes a confidence to do that you don't have when you're starting out, because you just think, oh my God, these people are better than me. What am I going to do now?
well, tell me this and kind of putting a bow on this. You've been doing this for a while. For any kind of aspiring entrepreneur who wants to be a technical CEO, and there's lots of them, what wisdom would you give them so they can skip a few steps that you didn't have to learn the hard way?
I actually think if you don't learn the hard way, you don't learn. So to a certain extent, they have to do it. I think, probably just trust yourself and don't be afraid to take kind of big decisions, because at the end of the day, if you don't take big decisions, what's the point of being a CEO, really? And I think if they're wrong, as long as you've got the right people around you, you can usually work it out and get through. People do look to you for leadership and decision making and those things. And if you don't make those decisions and you don't drive forward, then you're probably fooling yourself as well as them. But the people around you would be my number one choice.
I mean, trust is the currency of business. It's not money.
Yeah.
And I'm 100% with you. Well, Matt, this was fantastic. It's always a pleasure.
Likewise, really enjoyed it, Taylor. Thank you.
If people want to get in touch with you or the Virtual Forge, what's the best way to do that?
Well, we're on X. Probably the best way is to at the Virtual Forge and or they can drop me a direct email. I'm always happy to respond. Matt.Wicks at thevirtualforge.com.
Pleasure. Well, thanks for joining me today and have a wonderful week.
Fantastic. You too. Thanks, Taylor.
That's it for this episode of One Version of the Truth. If you're interested in how leaders turn data into real outcomes, you can follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Taylor Culver. Thanks again for listening.